Introduction. This roundtable is about the current kind of state of affairs to better understand the landscape that we're experiencing in higher education with respect to disability inclusion and disability access. And our panelists each represent a particular institution or organization. And over the next hour or so, we will share best practices. We will share effective strategies, perhaps talk about partnerships and stakeholders, but really try to have a more authentic understanding of the work, how we frame the work, and our successes and our challenges. I'm going to go ahead and read your bios very quickly to give everyone a sense of who our panelists are. So we have Corinne Dorel-Flamant. Corinne Dorel, PhD, is a teacher and researcher in the field of synthetic biology at the Biosciences Department of INSA, INSA, Lyon. She is currently attached to the research department of INSA Lyon to draw up an inventory of how laboratories address the issue of disability, and her mission is to contribute to the integration of humanities and social sciences in the research concerning global health and bioengineering. Marty Martin is the president of Drake University, an accomplished academic administrator, dean, and professor. Dr. Martin served 10 years at Gonzaga University as executive vice president, after serving as acting academic vice president and dean of the School of Law. He has been president of Drake University since 2015. And Raja Rajsekaran has 20 years experience as a business and development sector practitioner in public and private sector. Among other things, Raja is an active expert member of national and state level committees and working groups on disability policy, part of the founding team of the Wheelchair Basketball Federation of India. As a wheelchair tennis player, that's very exciting for me to hear. And co-founder of award-winning impact enterprise V-shesh. V-shesh has trained 3,000 plus job seekers with disabilities and has made 2,000 job connections in the last 4 years. Thank you all for agreeing to serve on the panel. I'm going to try to see your faces. Hi. Okay. Our first question, to try again to understand the current state of our practice and our profession with respect to disability access in higher education. Given that disabled students are sorely underrepresented in the States and around the world with respect to higher education, can you help us understand what barriers these students are encountering as they try to pursue higher ed? Marty, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Amanda, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. So I would start kind of at the macro level and say that the first barrier really will speak to the profession and the values of an institution. That is, how welcoming is an institution to diversity, to include supporting people with disabilities. I've been a higher education administrator since 2003 at 3 different institutions, and I've seen an evolution, certainly never hostility, but in some sense kind of grudging acceptance, to now where it's at an institution that I presently have the privilege of leading. It is a professed value of the institution that we do have a culture of inclusion, and that does include people with disabilities. As you heard Senator Harkin say a few moments ago, the Harkin Institute is at Drake University. We take great pride in that, and we also feel an obligation because of that to be an institution that fully embraces people with disabilities. And you can't underestimate the impact that the American with Disabilities Act has had on this. That act was adopted on July 26, 1990. It then had the amendments adopted in 2008, which Senator Harkin led the process to adopt the amendments as well, which were put in place to overcome some rulings of courts that had weakened the enforcement and not followed the original intent of the act. And so you saw even in the legislation kind of an evolution from a declaration of the value of welcoming people with disabilities into all walks of life. And we all, at least those of us in the United States, kind of saw the response to that, and at times it was welcome and at times it wasn't. And the amendments were necessary to kind of speak to what the courts have done. But now, 29 years after the passage of the ADA, 11 years after the passage of the amendments, Certainly the regulatory infrastructure that implemented the legislation and continues to implement that legislation has dismantled, continues to dismantle barriers to inclusion present in higher education and indeed all walks of life. But I think much more important, however, in my opinion, is that the ADA and its aftermath have fundamentally changed the way that many, perhaps most, I believe most Americans view the place of people with disability in everyday life, to include on college campuses. For many, and again, most, I believe, Americans, it's no longer imaginable that we would tell our disabled fellow citizens that you cannot participate fully in society, that you can't go to school, that you can't go to work, that you can't enjoy cultural and entertainment venues and the like. And the ADA created the mandate and the regulatory infrastructure that enforced that mandate, but more importantly, it's changed attitudes. And we really do see that now across the country, at varying degrees, of course, as with anything that's trying to make change. But certainly, I think on college campuses, we see it very strongly. And I say that with the reflection on the fact that we see it probably most strongly in our students. You know, perhaps the most powerful force for inclusion on our campus are our students. The vast majority of students into college today in the United States simply can't wrap their head around the notion that people with disabilities should be excluded from any part of the campus or college experience. You know, if someone were to try to argue that it's too costly, it's too cumbersome, it's too burdensome to do what must be done to accommodate students with disabilities, their fellow students with disabilities, it would be a gross affront to their sense of justice. And again, thanks to the ADA, they've grown up in a world where their disabled family members, friends, classmates have gone out in the world and made their way, and they won't even entertain the possibility of the alternative. And as an administrator, as a president of an institution, you know, they are reflecting the values of the place, and it's incumbent upon me to lead from that space. And it's a privilege to do so. I think in response to some of the other questions you'll pose, we can get into what the specifics of that look like. But in terms of what might be the most persistent barrier, or what's a barrier that has started to evaporate, it's this notion of what values are you embracing and living up to.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate framing this conversation through our values, because we talk a lot in higher education about diversity and inclusion and access, and we do not always include disability in that conversation. But disability access benefits everyone, and initiating the conversation from that place of what do we value and what type of community are we trying to create, I think really keeps us on track for thinking about disability consistently. Corinne?
Okay, good morning, everyone. So maybe a few words, and there is no way to for the slides.
I'm not sure. Yes, there we go.
I could, maybe it could help.
There we are.
But don't bother if it's not. Yeah? The second one, please. Number 2.
We just need to go through the.
Oh, okay.
Just sorry for this is a new kind of distance conference. We have so many people from. I just wanted to apologize for these technical issues. We are trying to connect with 40 countries around the world through a tool that has not been tested a lot before. So please, sorry for all that. But the important thing is that everybody is able to follow the discussion from far away. So sorry about that.
Okay, so that.
Okay. So as we work to get the PowerPoint displayed, if you have thoughts on what kind of barriers.
Well, I would like first to introduce INSA, because for most of people here, I think it doesn't mean anything.
Yes, please.
So I'm working in INSA, meaning French National Institute of Applied Science. And what is a bit different regarding other universities or institutes is that it is a network of French institutes, of 13 institutes located all over France. So yeah, it's this time it's perfect. Thank you. Oh, perfect. Thanks. So what is the point is that it's a network when you compare to other universities. So it's a strength that to be in such a network. And what is noticeable also is that INSA was created 62 years ago as a single institute devoted to engineer formation and militating already for social, academic, gender, and handicap diversity. So INSA graduates are trained to be proficient in science and technology, that's the basis, but with a sense of values, artistic sensitivity, and a sporting mindset, company culture, and openness to the world. So it's the two identified barriers now that we face in the INSA group. It's first self-censorship of disabled students to consider registering for an engineering school. So that's something we're working on. And two, the limited human and financial resources to both communicate and to open more widely our formation to disabled students while guaranteeing full inclusion to all of them. So that's really limitation.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, many congratulations to all of us for founding event of GUDIN. It's a big, great initiative. I would like to, before I touch upon this topic, I would like to present some data on the glaring disparity in access to higher education that exists in a country like India, and I'm sure it reflects on the similar status in other developing countries as well as in Africa and Asia. Firstly, if you look at India, we have reached 100% enrollment through a universal education scheme. But when it comes to persons with disabilities, we are still at 39% to not have access to education. Children with disabilities, 39% are still out of school. So that's like 1 in every 4 children are out of school, not even enrolled in school. If you just move up, we have about close to 45% illiteracy among persons with disabilities. If you go to higher education, again, the statistics, we have 70% people without disabilities enrolled in secondary education, out of which about over 30% graduate. If you compare that with persons with disabilities, we just have 13% at secondary education level and less than 5% graduate. So 1 in 20 are able to graduate. That's the abysmal status that we have a long way to go in closing the gap. Even after our system, we have a system of reserving seats in our higher education institutions. It was 3%, which is recently, thanks to a progressive law, is increased to 5%. So, but even after reserving 5% of seats, this is in public universities I'm talking about, 84% of the seats go unfulfilled. So only less than 15, around 15% are fulfilled. So we have a population of about 9% and a quota of about 5%, but less than 0.5% of seats are actually fulfilled. So I come from a city called Chennai in southern part of India, where about 1,500 seats in a very prominent university, with the aspiration for most individuals to go study well and do well. 1,500 seats are reserved for persons with disabilities, and we see just 200 getting fulfilled there. There lies the problem. So there are two sides of the coin here. The bigger side is, of course, from the university side or the college side. The barriers lie in starting with some basic accessibility, physical and digital accessibility barriers, right from the application system. A lot of inaccessibility exists. The second is after you come in, there is no support services available for students with disabilities at all. There are just barely a couple of colleges and universities where you get support services like a sign language interpreter or a note taker or a screen reader or any of those support services, which are taken for granted for most in In the developed world, they are not available as a support service. The third is universities, though they have a quota, they are not bound to fill the quota. So they just keep the seats open. So and they just do not have, there's no outreach to go to the community to explore ways of reaching out and showing commitment and intent to fill. So as a result of which, again, we see this gap becoming bigger. On the student side, because of the barriers to education, right from schooling to the societal barriers, they may not just make the cut of what the university needs. And so even if they apply, they do not actually get admissions. So and there are no remedial programs that are available for individuals who are attempting to get into a university to cross the gap or to come over this gap to make it to universities. So there are the barriers largely lie at the university level, while there are policies and frameworks which are enabling in order to have universities have an equal opportunity cell or set up Office of Disability Services. We are at the early stage of revolutionizing the inclusive system of higher education, and hopefully things will start looking up. Apart from education, we work as an institution. We work with higher education institutions to become more progressive and be inclusive in their approach.
So the barriers that disabled people encounter really are quite, there's quite a range, right, around attitudinal barriers that shape our societal dynamics, that speak to pipeline issues that start very, very early on and even before primary school. And then once students do arrive, if they arrive to higher education, it's an opportunity for a university to model best practices to the rest of society. Because I would argue that the physical and logistical barriers that disabled people encounter, that those attitudinal barriers are even worse, right? Even more damaging, which again is why we need to be connected to what our values are around inclusion for our community to inform better types of environmental design and changes that are sustainable. How do you all react to these types of barriers or constraints? I'm sure you have models or frameworks or best practices to share with us, but there's a lot of work to do with respect to disability and access in higher ed. So I hope that you can share with us some strategies that you've employed and perhaps help us understand what limitations there are around your capacity or imposed on your institution. Marty, is that?
Sure, I'll be happy to start there as well. So if I think about the question and can put it into two categories: facilities, about gaining access to space, and then programs. And I'll attend to both of those. In both instances, we're governed by Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and then Title III of the American with Disabilities Act, one of which is enforced by the Department of Education, the other by the Department of Justice. So again, there's this regulatory infrastructure and framework that we respond to. But as an aspiration, we try to go above and beyond even those requirements, and I'll talk to that. On the facility side, at a minimum, we're going to comply with the American with Disabilities Standards for Accessible Design Guide, and it contains things that are, requirements that are familiar to all of us, I believe. 60% of all building entrances must be wheelchair accessible. Cross slope of sidewalks be at a maximum of 2%. Elevator access required in multi-story buildings, etc. Things that we've now, at least in the United States and in the developed world, come to expect for all of our construction. But beyond that, we aspire to incorporate universal design features so that design adapts to people rather than people adapting to design. And one of the challenges there, of course, is cost. But I'm really enthused that in our work in building and major renovations, we've just come to accept that this is part of the environment. This is part of the goal that we're trying to achieve. And just as we are with environmental sustainability and various certifications in that space, we've committed ourselves to achieving, to building buildings to this scale, to this expectation. A couple of recent successes that I would call out. We're about to complete a Boys and Girls Club on our campus. Boys and Girls is a national organization in the United States that provides after-school activities as well as summer activities, particularly for children in need. And we're going to be the third private university in the United States with the Boys and Girls Club on its campus, kindergarten through 12th grade. It'll be open this summer. And the building itself is built to a high level of accessibility. But just to call out one part of it, we have a playground that goes along with the facility that will include options for the physically impaired, both with and without wheelchairs, hearing amplification, and tactile challenges for the sight impaired. So it's a fully engaged and available playground for children with disabilities. And then, of course, we are building a new facility for the Harkin Institute, and it will most certainly incorporate best practices for accessibility to serve as a guide for others, as a model for others to follow. And I'll call out a few of the elements that are going to come and be present in that space. So we'll have automatic sliding doors at the main entrance and for offices, so that you're not having to deal with handles or limited space to make your way into a room. We have a front and rear loading oversized elevator to accommodate larger motorized wheelchairs and limit the need to maneuver once you're in the space. The main circulation path, I think this is the primary architectural feature of the building. The main circulation path is going to be a ramp connecting the first and second floor, and the stairs are intentionally placed at the back of the building so as not to prioritize their use in the space, but rather the ramp will be the main use for everybody who comes into and out of the building. Circulation spaces are sized to allow for 2 motorized wheelchairs to pass with ample clearance, a contrast between color between walls and floors for low vision users, and then state-of-the-art sound amplification systems for the hearing impaired. So just another example of trying to build to the standards of universal design. New construction, frankly, is easier to accommodate these kinds of design features into than some of the major renovations we've had to undertake. We are an institution that was founded in 1881, and we have buildings dating back to 1881. And they certainly had no notion of accessibility then, and you can see that in their design. And so trying to go back and retrofit these buildings. We also are blessed with a number of architecturally significant buildings, particularly from mid-century. And we've got a number of world-renowned architects that design buildings on our campus. And this was, again, a period in which accessibility was not a priority. And now trying to go back and retrofit those buildings in particular, being sensitive to the architectural character of them as we must, creates a real challenge. In the early 2000s, we renovated what we call our quads, which are 4 of our residence halls designated for freshmen. And they were designed by Elio and Eros Saarinen, very famous architects. And to go in and put an elevator in that space, expand bathrooms, all the things that you want to do to meet these design expectations was no small feat, and of course came with some cost, but proud that the institution made the commitment to do just that. But it does create a real challenge, particularly on the major renovation side, because again, when you're doing the original construction, you just incorporate that into design in the first place, but trying to go back and do the renovations is a big challenge. On the program side, so it's one thing about gaining access, but once you've gained access, what is the experience that you're going to have? We embrace the interactive process, that it's an interactive process between student and the university in designing a reasonable accommodation that will enable the student to take full advantage of the offer of education and really the entire formation experience that we offer to our students.